It starts with a whisper, a rumor, a question no one inside the palace walls ever dared to say out loud. But tonight, you're going to hear it the way Prince Harry heard it at 40 years old, raw, unfiltered, and impossible to ignore. What if the man the world believes is your father isn't? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. What if the story you've been told since childhood, the one printed on glossy royal portraits and repeated in every official biography, was never the truth at all? And what if, after decades of silence, emotional bruises, suspicious comments, and late-night doubts, Prince Harry finally admitted the one thing we all suspected, the thing the monarchy spent years trying to bury, the thing Diana hinted at, the thing Charles avoided, the thing that changed everything? Because for the first time, in private, away from palace handlers and royal protocols, Harry said the words out loud. King Charles is not my biological father. A sentence that could shatter 1,000 years of royal lineage. A sentence that could destabilize the monarchy more than any scandal since Edward VIII abdicated. A sentence that could rewrite history. But here's the twist. Harry didn't stumble into this revelation. He didn't wake up one morning and suddenly believe it. This wasn't impulsive. This wasn't emotional. It wasn't a reaction to a tabloid headline or a fight with his family. No, this confession came after years, decades, of clues stacking on top of each other like puzzle pieces no one wanted to acknowledge were forming a picture. And the picture they created? Not the one Buckingham Palace wanted the world to see. Let me ask you something. If you grew up surrounded by wealth, crowns, jewels, and titles, but deep down felt different from everyone around you, wouldn't you wonder why? Wouldn't you question the moments that didn't make sense? The stories that didn't align? The strange reactions adults had whenever you asked simple questions? Harry did. But all those questions were pushed down, buried beneath royal duty, swallowed by years of being told that the institution comes first. Until he turned 40. 40, the age when the past becomes louder than the future. When old memories begin resurfacing. When the things you tried to forget come knocking again. And what resurfaced for Harry was not just a childhood rumor. Not just a comparison to a man named James Hewitt. Not just whispers from palace corridors. But something much heavier. Something Diana left behind for him. Something she couldn't give him when she was alive. And it would reopen every unanswered question he'd ever had. But before we get to that, we need to go back. Not to Diana's last days. Not to the Panorama interview. Not even to the moment he and Meghan left the royal family. No, we need to go back to the moment the world first noticed something wasn't right. Because this story didn't start with Harry. It started with us, the public, squinting at photos, comparing jawlines, analyzing hair color, and asking the same forbidden question behind closed doors. Why doesn't Harry look like Charles or William? That was the first spark. And sparks always lead somewhere. But here is where the story takes a turn. The palace didn't just ignore those rumors. They fought them. Hard. Almost too hard. If there was truly nothing to hide, why did royal insiders act like the suggestion was a threat to national security? Why did they shut down conversations, threaten tabloids, and snap back at reporters who dared bring it up? Why did Charles himself avoid addressing the speculation even once, not even in passing? Strange, right? Because sometimes the truth isn't protected with silence. Sometimes it's protected with fury. And Harry, growing up, felt that fury. Even as a child, he sensed there were topics he was not allowed to touch. Names he shouldn't mention. Stories he shouldn't ask about. Especially stories involving his mother's private life. Especially stories involving the cavalry officer she had a friendship, or more, with. But what if I told you the relationship everyone suspected wasn't even the real story? What if the truth isn't about James Hewitt at all? What if the real father figure, the one Diana trusted, confided in, and relied on during the darkest years of her marriage, wasn't the man the tabloids obsessed over? What if there was someone else? Someone much closer. Someone whose name has barely been whispered in public. Someone who, according to a source close to Harry, left behind a secret that would eventually collide with the prince's life like a speeding train. Do you see where this is going? Maybe you think you do. But trust me, the twist in this story isn't what you expect. Because before Harry ever considered DNA tests, secret letters, or midnight conversations, something happened behind palace walls that changed the trajectory of his entire life. It was subtle, almost invisible to the outside world. But to Harry, it was the moment he realized he might not be who he thought he was. And years later, when he finally spoke the truth aloud, everything clicked. But before we get to that final confession, the one that detonated every ounce of royal stability, we need to understand the build-up, the tension, the clues, the moments that didn't make sense until he reached the age of 40 and everything snapped into place. Because this story isn't just about paternity. It's about identity, about belonging, about a child growing up in the world's most famous family and yet feeling like an outsider. It's about Diana's fear, Charles's distance, William's anger, and Harry's lingering suspicion that something massive was being kept from him. But the shocking part? Everyone involved, the palace, the press, the public, was focusing on the wrong clue, and the real truth was hidden in plain sight. The question is, are you ready to hear it? Because what happened next? The real beginning of this unraveling would push Harry onto a path no one in the royal family ever wanted him to walk. And once it started, there was no turning back. Stopping here, what pushed Harry forward wasn't anger. It wasn't rebellion. It wasn't even the pressure of public opinion. It was something far quieter. A memory, one he tried to forget for decades. Picture this. A young Harry, barely old enough to understand the complexities of adult conversations, wandering through the corridors of Kensington Palace. It's late, the halls dim, the world outside asleep. He isn't supposed to be awake. He isn't supposed to be there. But children don't understand palace protocols. They understand curiosity. He hears voices, muted at first, urgent, two adults, not staff, people with authority, people who spoke in hushed tones but forgot to close the door fully. Harry paused, because they weren't whispering about politics or schedules or state visits. They were whispering about him. He caught only fragments, phrases that stuck to his memory like burrs. He shouldn't be told. It would destroy the monarchy. Not Charles's responsibility. Diana's decision. Words far too heavy for a child. Words with meanings he couldn't yet decode. But the tone, the fear, that he understood. And though he didn't fully comprehend what he'd heard, he felt it. The electric jolt of being at the center of a conversation adults never intended him to know existed. Have you ever overheard something about yourself that you couldn't shake, even years later? A sentence, a comment, a strange tone, something tiny but unsettling. Harry carried that moment like a silent bruise. And as he got older, the bruise deepened. Because the royal family has rules. Unspoken rules. One of the biggest? Don't ask questions that could unravel the institution. Especially questions about lineage. Especially questions about what Diana endured. Yet those overheard fragments echoed inside him. And as he entered adolescence, he began noticing things. Things he'd been too young to interpret the first time around. For instance, why did Charles always seem emotionally distant from him, but more formal, more controlled, when the two were alone? Why did palace staff stiffen whenever his mother's friendships were mentioned? Why did reporters sometimes smirk or exchange glances when asking him questions about family resemblance? And why? This part hurt the most. Did William get more "you're just like your father" comments than he ever did? Harry laughed it off, joked about it, played the role. But inside, every remark sharpened the confusion. Because even if he didn't yet understand the meaning of what he overheard as a child, the world around him was constantly reinforcing the possibility that the whispers held truth. Still, he stayed silent. Until something else happened, something bigger. The moment the public rumor became a global firestorm. James Hewitt, the cavalry officer with the same flaming red hair. The man Diana confided in during some of the darkest moments of her marriage. The man whose presence alone sparked headlines. You remember the photos. You remember the side-by-side comparisons. People weren't whispering anymore. They were shouting, screaming, demanding answers. But here's the twist nobody expected. Harry wasn't fixated on the Hewitt rumors the way the world was. In fact, he dismissed them for one simple reason. Diana met James Hewitt years after Harry was born. The timeline didn't match, and Harry knew it. So if not Hewitt, then who? And why did the palace panic so fiercely whenever the topic came up? These questions simmered beneath the surface for years. But nothing erupted. Not yet. Because Harry had responsibilities. School, royal duties, the military, public appearances, relationships. Life kept him moving, fast, too fast to dwell on things hidden in the cracks of childhood memories. Until one day, those cracks started widening. It began when he turned 30. 30, the age most people start rethinking the stories they were told as kids. The age when questions become harder to silence. Harry started noticing inconsistencies. Tiny ones at first, then bigger, about his upbringing, access to certain medical records, and unexplained restrictions placed on him that did not apply to William. For example, he was discouraged from taking certain heritage, genealogy, or ancestry programs the public casually participated in. He was strongly advised against any medical curiosity testing that involved DNA. Even benign ancestry kits sent to celebrities as promotional gifts were intercepted before they reached him. Strange, right? Unless there was something someone didn't want discovered. But Harry didn't push yet. He became a husband, a father, a man trying to balance love for his family with a growing disconnection from the institution he was born into. And then life slowed down. For the first time, he had space to breathe, to think, to remember. And the memory that returned, sharp, clear, and unavoidable, was that night outside the half-closed door. The whispered words. The fear in those adults' voices. It would destroy the monarchy. What would destroy it? Why would his existence threaten anything? And why, after 40 years, did the questions feel louder than ever? These weren't just doubts anymore. They were fractures. And every fracture leads to a break. Harry didn't know it yet, but he was about to open a door that had stayed locked for decades. A door sealed long before he even understood the meaning of lineage or betrayal. But destiny has a way of circling back, especially when there's a secret involved. A secret Diana took to her grave. A secret Charles avoided. A secret the palace protected at any cost. A secret Harry was finally ready to confront, even if it meant dismantling the very identity he'd been raised with. Because when you turn 40, you stop running from the truth. You turn around and face it. And that's exactly what he did. But what happened next? The moment Harry began uncovering piece after piece of the puzzle would send shockwaves through the monarchy, through his own marriage, through his brotherhood with William, and through the world. And it all began with one object. An object handed to him unexpectedly. An object that Diana herself had kept hidden. A simple envelope. Unmarked. Light. Silent. Waiting for him. Waiting for 40 years. And when he finally opened it, everything changed. Harry didn't open the envelope right away. He couldn't. Not because he was afraid of the contents, though he was, but because of what the envelope represented. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It wasn't just handwriting from a mother he lost too soon. It wasn't just a message sealed away in time. It was a truth he wasn't prepared to face. Tell me this. Have you ever held something in your hands that felt heavier than its weight? Something so small, yet so dangerous, you're afraid that opening it might change who you are? That was Harry, sitting alone, holding a simple white envelope, feeling the shaking start in his hands. Because deep down he knew. He didn't want to know, but he knew. Diana wouldn't have kept something hidden unless it mattered, unless it was private, unless it was meant for him, and him alone. And that fact alone made his pulse race. But let's rewind for a moment. How did the envelope even reach him? It wasn't delivered by the palace. Not by staff. Not by William. Not by Charles. It came from someone unexpected. Someone from Diana's circle. Her inner circle. One of the few people she trusted with her final wishes. The kind of person who disappears into history when the world stops looking, but resurfaces at the exact moment fate needs them to. The message that came with it was simple. This is yours. She wanted you to have it when you were old enough to understand. Old enough. Not 18. Not 21. Not 30. 40. Why 40? Why now? Harry mulled over that question as he stared at the envelope. Not because he expected a dramatic revelation, though he feared one, but because it was so deliberate. Diana had timed something. But what? He held the envelope close, felt the thinness of it, heard the faint sound of a single page inside. One page. One truth. One secret. A mother's voice reaching across decades. Harry wasn't ready, but destiny rarely asks for permission. Before he opened it, he found himself drifting into memory again. This time, not to overheard whispers, but to a moment so intimate and quiet that even he had forgotten it until now. He was sitting beside Diana when he was very young. They were alone. She was brushing his hair, something she loved to do because it soothed him. She paused suddenly and looked at him with an expression he didn't understand at the time, a mixture of sorrow, fear, and fierce love. She said, in that soft, trembling voice, "You're different, darling. But that doesn't mean you're not loved." He didn't grasp the weight of those words then. He thought she meant personality differences, or that he was more sensitive than William, or that he was her wild child with a big heart. He laughed it off. But now, decades later, staring at a sealed envelope, those words echoed with new meaning. "You're different, darling. Different how? Different why? Different from whom?" He never asked, and she never explained. But mothers don't speak in riddles unless they're protecting their children from something. And Diana, God love her, spent most of her life protecting Harry. From the press, from palace politics, from people who underestimated him, and maybe from the truth. A truth she wasn't allowed, or afraid, to spell out. Now sitting alone with the envelope, 40-year-old Harry felt the past leaning over his shoulder like a ghost. But something else haunted him too. Charles, not the public figure, not the king, not the man with the polished speeches and rigid posture. The father, the man who raised him, the man he spent years trying to understand. A man who, at times, felt warm and kind, and at other times, impossibly distant. Harry remembered moments when Charles seemed uncomfortable with physical affection from him, yet not as much with William. He remembered how Charles sometimes avoided certain topics when Harry asked questions about Diana's emotions. He remembered how anything involving Diana's private life would cause tension in the room, especially around Charles. It was almost like Charles feared something. Feared a topic, feared a connection, feared a truth that might slip out if the wrong question were asked. Why? That question had circled Harry's mind for years, but it never felt urgent. Until now. Because if Diana had left something secret behind, something sealed, then Charles's distance, the palace's panic, and the whispered fears of those staff members might all be connected. But before Harry opened the envelope, before he allowed the truth to reshape his identity, he did something unexpected. He waited. Not a day, not a week. He waited hours. Just sitting, staring, as if the envelope itself held power. As if once opened, the contents couldn't be unopened again. As if it would pull a thread that might unravel his entire life. He wasn't wrong. Now here is where the story takes an emotional turn. While he sat there in silence, another memory surfaced, one far more painful. It was a moment between him and William, long before the royal split, long before the public tensions, long before they became men divided by choices. They were teenagers, and William said something sharp, something blurted in anger during a sibling fight. Something Harry never allowed himself to unpack. William shouted, "You don't understand because you're not like the rest of us." Harry froze back then. He thought William meant personality differences or their roles in line to the throne. But now with Diana's envelope in his hands, those words returned like a blade. "You're not like the rest of us." Was it just brotherly frustration? Or had William been told something Harry hadn't? Was he hinting at something? Was it a slip? A warning? A buried truth? Harry didn't know. Not yet. But that memory shook him. Because sometimes the most painful truths aren't spoken clearly. They leak. They slip. They surface in anger or fear. They appear in the cracks of conversations that seemed harmless at the time. Harry felt those cracks widening. The envelope sat in his lap like a ticking bomb. At some point, he realized he couldn't run from it anymore. He couldn't pretend. He couldn't delay the inevitable. He took a breath. Deep, unsteady, courageous. Then he slid his finger under the seal. The sound of tearing paper, soft, delicate, felt thunderous. Inside was a folded sheet. One page. Handwritten. His mother's handwriting. Just seeing it made his chest tighten. He unfolded it slowly, almost reverently. Her voice spoke through ink, and the first line, the very first sentence, was nothing like he expected. It did not reassure him. It did not comfort him. It did not protect him. It warned him. Harry stared at that first line, feeling his pulse thudding in his ears. Diana's handwriting wasn't elegant that day. It wasn't smooth or controlled the way she normally wrote. It looked rushed, unsteady, almost frightened. And the opening line read, "If you are reading this, then what I feared has happened. Not, I love you. Not, I'm proud of you. Not, this is the truth about your father. No, a warning, a mother's warning, the kind that stands between a child and the world." Harry felt the air leave his lungs. What she feared? What had happened? What danger was she talking about? He continued reading, eyes trembling over each word. "A day may come when you begin to question who you are. Not because of who raised you, but because of what others say. When that happens, you must follow the truth, no matter how painful it is." That sentence hit him like a meteor. A mother telling her son he may one day question who he is. And not because of Charles. Not because of family dynamics, but because of what others say. That was the part that twisted like a knife. Because for decades, others had been saying the same thing behind closed doors. Harry doesn't look like Charles. Harry resembles someone else. Harry is different. Was Diana acknowledging that? Hinting at it? Preparing him for it? He kept reading. "You were born from love. Love that existed long before the public knew of it, and long before the palace dared to admit it. The truth is not in the bloodline they protect, but in the heart you carry." Harry blinked. His hands shook. This wasn't a riddle. It was a confession. A mother explaining that his existence came from a kind of love the palace would not acknowledge. Not duty, not protocol, not royal expectation. Love. But whose love? He looked deeper into the letter. And that's when Diana wrote something that chilled him. "There are people around you who know parts of the truth, but not the whole. Do not trust those who serve the institution. Trust only those who served me." Harry felt his stomach drop. Because those who served the institution? Those were the people who had raised him, guided him, watched over him. Or so he thought. Now Diana was telling him, from beyond the grave, not to trust them. But the letter didn't stop there. She hinted at someone else. Someone unnamed. Someone she described only as the man who protected my heart when the world became too cruel. Harry's breath caught. Not a title, not a role, not a rank. A description, a deeply emotional one. And it wasn't Charles. This wasn't how Diana described her husband. This wasn't a reference to the rigid marriage she endured. This wasn't about the monarchy. This was personal. Someone who protected her heart. Someone who cared for her when she was most vulnerable. Someone from outside the palace walls, or inside. Harry didn't know. Diana continued. "If one day you feel the truth calling to you, follow it with courage. You will know who to ask. You will know where to look. Know who to ask. Know where to look." Harry searched the page for a name. A clue. A hint. Nothing. Not one identifying word. Why didn't she name him? Was she afraid the letter might be intercepted? Read by the wrong person? Used against him? Her last lines were the ones that rattled him the most. "You are my son, and that is the greatest truth. But the rest, the truth you seek, is yours to uncover when you are ready. I believe in you." And then, her signature. A sweeping, emotional curve. Diana. Just her name. No title. No HRH. No princess. Just a mother speaking to her child. Harry folded the letter carefully, as if it were made of glass. His chest tightened. His eyes stung. He felt like he'd been dropped into a well of questions with no rope to climb back up. Because the letter didn't confirm anything directly. But it didn't deny anything either. Diana didn't say Charles was his father. She didn't say Charles wasn't. She didn't mention Hewitt. She didn't mention any other man by name. But she planted something worse, something far more powerful. Doubt. And not the kind that comes from tabloids or public rumors. Doubt from Diana herself. He could no longer ignore the truth tugging at him. Something in his identity was hidden. Something significant. Something powerful enough to scare the palace. Powerful enough for Diana to leave a letter preparing him for the day he'd go looking. He sat back, trembling, overwhelmed. And in that moment, a moment that lasted far too long, he realized the truth wasn't going to fall into his hands. He would have to chase it. He would have to confront the one question that had stalked him his entire life. If Charles was not his biological father, then who was? And more importantly, Who else knew? Harry knew what he had to do next, even though he dreaded it. And that next step? It would take him straight into the heart of a secret the monarchy had spent decades trying to bury. Because Diana's letter wasn't an answer, it was a doorway, and Harry was finally ready to step through it. What he discovered when he did, no one, not the palace, not the press, not even Harry himself, was prepared for it. Because the truth waiting on the other side would shake the monarchy to its core. It always begins the same way. With one photo, one headline, one side-by-side comparison that spreads faster than any royal press statement ever could. A picture of Charles, a picture of Harry, then a picture of another man, the man the world couldn't stop talking about. 3 images, one implication, and suddenly, the rumor was born, whispered first in pubs, then in tabloids, then everywhere. Does Prince Harry really look like King Charles? The royal family hated the question, despised it, did everything in their power to smother it. But the thing about rumors? They are like smoke. You can fan them away. You can hide the flames. But somewhere, something is burning. And this rumor, this question, refused to die. Let me ask you something directly, like Harry has silently asked himself for years. Why did the world latch onto this rumor so fiercely? Why did it become a global obsession? And why did the palace seem more panicked about it than any other royal scandal? Because people saw something. Something they weren't supposed to notice. Something that made them squint at magazine covers and TV broadcasts. Harry didn't fit the royal mold. He didn't inherit Charles's features. He didn't resemble the Windsors' famously sharp profiles. He didn't mirror William's look, the heir's unmistakably royal face. Instead, Harry stood out. Bright red hair, flushed cheeks, softened jawline, striking resemblance to someone outside the palace. And everyone saw it. Here's where the story gets interesting. When Harry was a child, the comparisons were whispered behind closed doors. When he became a teenager, they escaped into gossip columns. When he reached adulthood, the rumors exploded in the global press. But there's a moment in the timeline most people forget, a spark that turned quiet speculation into international obsession. It didn't come from a tabloid, or a paparazzi photo, or a leaked interview. It came from a single, unguarded comment from a palace staffer. A comment not meant for the public. A comment overheard by a journalist. A comment that could have cost them their job. The staffer said, "The resemblance is inconvenient." Inconvenient? Why would a resemblance be inconvenient? Unless the resemblance pointed somewhere the palace didn't want attention. That comment was printed, then quickly scrubbed, but not before it spread like wildfire through the press. The palace issued a statement calling it nonsense, hurtful, and fabricated. But the damage? Already done. Because once the public hears a rumor that juicy, that provocative, that layered with royal mystery, people don't forget it. And Harry felt it. He wasn't oblivious. He heard whispers at charity events, saw sneers from photographers, felt the sting of journalists fishing for reactions. He even joked about it in his 20s, laughing it off with the same forced humor that hides deeper pain. But the truth? It bothered him. Deeply. Because behind every rumor, there's a reason it exists. And behind this rumor, there was too much smoke to ignore. People pointed out the shape of his nose, the structure of his jaw, the flaming red hair that traced back to Diana's side, but not Charles's. People compared his smile, his build, his posture, every new angle, every new photo, every time he walked beside Charles. Someone, somewhere, said the words. They don't look related. You'd think the palace would brush it off with grace. Laugh about it. Address it once and move on. But that's not what they did. They overreacted. They issued stern warnings to the press, threatened defamation, silenced certain tabloids, discouraged palace guests from ever discussing it. That's the part that always raised eyebrows. If a claim is ridiculous, you ignore it. If a claim is dangerous, you erase it. The palace chose erasure. But here's the most revealing part. Their reaction wasn't consistent. William? He shrugged it off, smirked at the comparisons, even teased Harry about his hair. Charles, though? He stiffened, tensed, sometimes even left the room. Why? Why would a father be triggered by comments implying his son didn't look like him? Why would he avoid jokes about it when William and Harry both treated it lightly? Unless, deep down, he feared something. That fear, the one Harry sensed long before he could articulate it, became part of the rumor's life cycle. Because rumors don't survive for decades on gossip alone. They survive when the people involved behave strangely. And make no mistake, the palace behaved strangely. Take the infamous photo incident. Harry was around 10. A family portrait session. Dozens of photographers. Perfect lighting. The photographer told Charles and Harry to stand closer, father and son. Harry stepped forward. Charles stepped back. Just a fraction. Barely noticeable. But it was enough for several photographers to whisper about it later over drinks. Enough that one recalled it publicly years later, saying, "It was the only father-son pair I've shot where the father seemed uncomfortable." Now, does that alone prove anything? No, of course not. But in a story filled with fragile clues, strange reactions matter. And Harry, even as a child, noticed. Because children know when they are loved. And they know when something is off. Harry felt both. He felt love in some moments, and emotional distance in many others. And the world around him amplified the disconnect. Every tabloid headline, every paparazzi flash, every anonymous source leaking shocking evidence. All of it pointed to one thing. Harry might not be Charles's biological son. But here's where the rumor became more than speculation, more than curiosity, more than a joke printed beside celebrity gossip. It became a global conversation. Because a single, explosive detail hit the spotlight that the palace could not explain away. James Hewitt himself spoke, and his words, whether true or not, ignited a firestorm the monarchy struggled to contain. James Hewitt. A name the palace desperately wanted erased from history. A name that made Charles flinch. A name the British public couldn't stop bringing up for nearly 3 decades. And for good reason. When Hewitt finally agreed to an interview. After years of speculation, tabloid baiting, and personal attacks, he made a statement that sent shockwaves through the world. He said, "I can understand why people think that." That was it. That single sentence. No denial. No outrage. No firm rejection of the rumors. Just an acknowledgement that the resemblance was understandable. And the public lost its mind. Why didn't he shut it down? Why didn't he say, "No, absolutely not. I am not Prince Harry's father"? Why leave the door open? Unless he had his own reasons for leaving it open. But here's the twist. One the public didn't know, and one Harry knew only because Diana told him when he got older. Diana didn't meet Hewitt until after Harry was born. The timeline didn't match. So why did the rumor persist? Because resemblance is powerful. Because speculation is addictive. Because people love a scandal. But also because someone else, someone the public never focused on, resembled Harry even more. Someone Diana trusted. Someone always close. Someone the palace never publicly addressed. But we'll come back to that later. For now, let's stay with Hewitt, because his words, and lack of clarity, changed everything for Harry. Imagine being Harry at 20 years old. Seeing your face plastered across tabloids next to a man who wasn't your father. Watching late-night comedians mock your lineage. Seeing comparisons everywhere. Newspapers, TV, even schoolyard jokes. Imagine carrying that weight. Imagine hearing the whispers even as you walked into official engagements, saluted soldiers, or smiled for cameras. You know what the cruelest part was? People didn't whisper quietly. They whispered loudly, boldly, right in front of him sometimes. Because everyone believed the rumor was harmless. Everyone except the one person at the center of it. Harry. But here's something few people know. Harry once confronted the rumor head-on, privately, with someone inside the palace. Not Charles. Not William. Someone else. Someone who said something that haunted him. During a discussion about the tabloids, Harry asked, half joking, half desperate, "Why do they say he's my father?" The staff member hesitated, and hesitated, and hesitated, then said, "People will believe what's easiest to accept." Easiest to accept? What did that mean? Why wasn't the answer simply, because people love nonsense? Why wasn't the reaction immediate dismissal? Harry never forgot the look on that person's face. A look of someone who knew more than they were allowed to say. A look that planted yet another seed of doubt. But the real turning point, the moment this rumor became something Harry couldn't avoid, happened when he entered the military. People assumed that going into the army gave Harry privacy, freedom, a break from royal scrutiny. Wrong. It was worse. In the military, banter rules the day. Nothing is sacred. Everyone gets teased. About parents, siblings, relationships, everything. And Harry heard it all. Oi, Hewitt Jr. Fancy some horse riding lessons like your dad? Red hair like your mum's lover, yeah? Jokes. But jokes with teeth. Now, imagine hearing those lines every week. Every deployment. Every drinking night. Even in a brotherhood built on trust, the rumor followed him. And if you think he brushed it off, you're mistaken. Something inside him tightened every time. Not because of the content, but because of the reaction it triggered in him. He didn't just feel annoyed. He felt uneasy, because he didn't know the truth. And that is the worst feeling in the world. Not knowing. Not knowing what's real. Not knowing who you are. Not knowing why the world keeps questioning your identity. But here's the part nobody talks about. Harry never looked uncomfortable when someone compared him to Hewitt. He looked uncomfortable when someone compared him to Charles. Why? If Charles was unquestionably his father, the comparisons should have been reassuring, comforting, affirming. But they weren't. They bothered him deeply, and Harry didn't understand why, not then. But he would. And when he finally understood the reason, he would feel betrayed in a way that no son should ever feel betrayed by the people who raised him. Another detail people forget. In the royal family, lineage is everything. Bloodline isn't symbolic, it's literal. It determines duty, status, the throne, the future of the nation. Illegitimacy isn't a scandal for them. It's a threat to monarchy, a threat to tradition, a threat to the institution's power. So when the public joked about Harry's father, it wasn't just embarrassing, it was destabilizing. And the palace knew that, which is why, behind the scenes, something strange happened. In Harry's teenage years, there were multiple unofficial efforts inside the palace to correct the narrative. Press officers were instructed to leak positive stories about Harry's resemblance to Charles. Fashion choices were guided to emphasize similarities. Even public appearances were choreographed in a way that positioned Harry beside Charles more often than beside Diana's family. Optics. 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 The palace tried to manage the rumor like a wildfire. But guess what? Every time they attempted to control it, it burned hotter. Because the more you deny something, the more people believe it. And Harry noticed that too. He noticed everything. But what he didn't notice, not at first, was how the rumor was only the surface. The real story was happening underneath. Quietly. Secretly. Out of sight. Because while the world obsessed over Hewitt, while the press hounded Charles, while the palace issued denials, someone inside the palace was hiding the real truth. Someone with access. Someone with authority. Someone who knew exactly what had happened years ago. And the rumor, the one that refused to die, was never about appearance. It was a distraction, a decoy, a smokescreen keeping the world's eyes on James Hewitt, while the real answer hid in plain sight. Harry didn't know that yet, but he would, because soon he would receive a message that would flip the entire narrative upside down. A message that didn't point to Hewitt. A message that didn't point to Charles. A message that pointed to someone else entirely. Someone far more dangerous. And the moment Harry realized that, the rumor that refused to die suddenly made perfect sense. Harry had spent years carrying the weight of whispers, photos, and jokes. But the weight wasn't just public opinion. It was private knowledge he felt, even as a child, pressing down on him like a shadow he could never escape. Because rumors are rarely just noise. They're signals. Signals that someone doesn't want you to know is real. And that's exactly what Harry started to feel. He remembered one afternoon as a teenager. A rare moment alone in the palace library. Sunlight streaming through the windows. The polished wooden floors gleaming. He found a set of old photo albums belonging to Diana. Flipping through them, he noticed something strange. There were images of himself as a toddler next to a man who was never mentioned in public records. Not Charles. Not any known royal. The resemblance was subtle, a curve of the jaw, the shape of the eyes, but undeniable. Harry froze. He felt a shiver run down his spine. He looked closer. The man was smiling at Diana. Affection in every gesture. A familiarity. A closeness he had never witnessed with Charles. And yet, no one ever mentioned him. No captions. No names. Nothing. Why? Harry asked Diana once about people in the photos. She smiled. She dodged the question. It's complicated, darling, she said softly. Some things are best left for later. Later. Harry always remembered that word. Later had arrived at 40. The years built layers of confusion. Every meeting, every dinner, every family photograph added pieces to a puzzle he didn't know existed. And the whispers about James Hewitt? They were everywhere. But Harry knew what the world didn't. The timeline didn't match. Yet the palace allowed the story to persist. Why? Because while the public focused on Hewitt, the palace worked to conceal the real father. The person who truly mattered. The person Diana had trusted. The person whose identity could dismantle decades of royal image. Imagine growing up with that shadow. Imagine feeling it in glances, in subtle comments, in how adults behaved around you. Imagine knowing, deep down, that there was a truth you weren't allowed to touch. Harry lived in that tension. Every step of his life. Every milestone. Every public appearance. And each time someone made a joke about resemblance, he felt the same knot in his stomach. Not embarrassment. Not anger. Fear. Fear of a truth hidden behind palace walls. A truth no one would speak aloud. And yet, despite the rumors, despite the whispers, Harry did something extraordinary. He observed. He remembered. He pieced together clues over decades. Little moments most people overlooked. Charles's distance in private moments. William's occasional hints, cryptic remarks, or frustration. Diana's cryptic warnings. Even the subtle behavior of palace aides, the ones who knew more than they let on. All of it pointed to something bigger than the rumor itself. Something deeper. Something personal. Something dangerous to the institution. Harry didn't know it yet, but the whispers and the photos and the jokes were preparing him. They were shaping him. They were readying him for the moment he would finally face the envelope. Because when the truth comes, it's never gentle. It hits you like a wave, knocking the life you thought you knew off its axis. And that envelope, that single piece of paper Diana left behind, would do exactly that. Before that, though, Harry had to survive the rumor itself. The rumor that refused to die. The rumor that haunted his childhood, adolescence, military years, and early adulthood. The rumor that whispered, over and over, in every photograph, every conversation, every media headline. Maybe Charles isn't your father. And it wasn't just idle speculation. It was preparation. For the moment when Harry would turn 40. For the moment when the letter would arrive. For the moment when he would finally know the truth. Because the rumor was not the story. It was the warning. The smoke before the fire. And the fire was coming. The fire Harry didn't yet see was more than whispers, jokes, or awkward glances. It was the web of secrecy that surrounded him from birth. A web spun by people who loved him, feared him, or simply wanted to control the story. As he grew older, the puzzle pieces began to stack in strange ways. Family gatherings, official events, moments where Charles's distance was palpable, William's eyes too sharp, Diana's smiles bittersweet. Harry noticed all of it, and he filed it away, like evidence. Even when he laughed it off in front of the public, behind closed doors he questioned everything. Who was he really? Who could he trust? And why did certain adults around him behave as if saying the wrong thing could collapse his entire world? Let's pause for a moment. Imagine you're Harry. You've lived in one of the most publicized families in the world. Every action, every look, every gesture scrutinized. And yet the most important truth, your parentage, is cloaked in secrecy. How would that shape you? For Harry, it shaped him profoundly. It made him watch, listen, and question everything. It made him sensitive to subtleties others missed. It made him distrustful. It made him cautious. It made him impatient. But perhaps most importantly, it made him curious. Because humans have a natural drive to uncover the truth, especially about themselves. And nothing drives curiosity like uncertainty, the kind that feels personal, intimate, and slightly forbidden. Harry's curiosity simmered quietly for years. It surfaced in subtle ways. Questions he didn't ask aloud, books he glanced at, articles he memorized, conversations he observed. Then came the first major public blowback, the media frenzy over James Hewitt. Now, The timing was important. Diana's affair with Hewitt had ended long before Harry's birth. Everyone who knew the timeline knew the truth. But the public didn't. The tabloids, sensing opportunity, ran with it. They paired Harry's childhood photos with James Hewitt's, highlighted supposed similarities, and created side-by-side comparisons for maximum impact. The palace reacted predictably: denial, threats, damage control, statements labeling the comparisons false or hurtful. But denial never extinguishes suspicion. It fuels it. And it was this constant push-pull, rumor, denial, speculation, that hardened Harry's instincts. He didn't need DNA evidence yet. He didn't need confirmation. He only needed to see patterns. And the patterns were everywhere. He noticed it in Charles's parenting style, how he treated William versus himself. In the comments William made, sometimes in anger, sometimes teasing, that seemed layered with meaning. In Diana's protective yet cryptic responses. In the staff's strange glances when Harry asked too many questions. Every moment, a clue. Every glance, a hint. Every word, a whisper of possibility. The rumor that wouldn't die was more than idle speculation. It was a breadcrumb trail. A trail leading him to the truth that would arrive at 40, wrapped in the envelope his mother had left. And as he reached adulthood, the whispers evolved. They followed him into the military, into charity events, into interviews and public appearances. People whispered behind their hands, made veiled jokes, sent subtle signals. And Harry never forgot a single one. The joke about his red hair. The comment about his wild personality. The teasing about James Hewitt. They all carried weight. Not just humor, a deeper, uncomfortable weight. Because the palace's overreaction, the carefully orchestrated denials, the misdirected attention on Hewitt, and the persistent public rumors, all of it pointed to one truth. This was never about James Hewitt. It was never about the resemblance. It was about a secret someone was protecting. A secret Harry would uncover only when he was ready. Only when the world couldn't dictate his narrative. Only when he was 40. 40 years of preparation. 40 years of clues. 40 years of subtle lessons delivered through whispers, glances, and hidden warnings. And that is where Chapter 1 leads us, to the threshold of discovery. But what came next? The moment that finally pulled the rumor, the whispers, and the photographs into sharp, undeniable clarity, would shock not only Harry, but the entire monarchy. By the time Harry reached his 30s, the rumor had transformed. It was no longer idle speculation. It had become a quiet pressure, a shadow following him into every room, every event, every conversation. He had learned to navigate it carefully, to laugh at it in public, to ignore it privately, to compartmentalize it. But there was one thing he couldn't ignore: the patterns. The way Charles reacted when certain topics were mentioned. The way William occasionally slipped hints during arguments or casual conversations. The way palace staff avoided certain answers or deflected questions. Harry began to realize that what everyone was pointing to, the resemblance to James Hewitt, the odd jokes, the whispers, was just a smokescreen. Because the real story had been there all along. Quiet, hidden, waiting. It was in the photographs Diana left behind. In the letters she wrote, but never gave publicly. In the moments Charles seemed distant, even cold, when Harry sought connection. In William's rare, tense remarks, carefully veiled as jokes. The rumor that refused to die wasn't a distraction. It was a warning, a breadcrumb trail for Harry, leading him toward the truth his mother had protected. And then came the pivotal moment, the catalyst that would push Harry to confront the secret in earnest. It was a seemingly ordinary day. An envelope arrived at his private residence. Unmarked. Silent. Waiting. It wasn't sent by the palace. It wasn't delivered by staff. It wasn't a mistake. It came from someone Diana trusted. Someone who had remained loyal for decades. And inside that envelope was a single sheet of paper. A message from his mother. Harry didn't know it yet, but this letter would change everything. Because it didn't just reference the rumor. It didn't just acknowledge speculation. It confirmed that the whispers, the glances, the odd moments, they all pointed toward a truth the world wasn't ready to hear. A truth he was now ready to confront. He unfolded the letter slowly, almost reverently. Every word from Diana struck him like a physical blow. Her handwriting carried emotion, urgency, and above all, warning. And as he read, Harry felt the decades of confusion, doubt, and observation coalesce into clarity. Not full clarity, that would come later, but the moment of recognition, the understanding that the rumor wasn't just noise. It wasn't just a joke. It wasn't just tabloid fodder. It was a signal pointing toward the reality that had been carefully hidden from him his entire life. And for the first time, Harry realized the story everyone was focused on, James Hewitt, resemblance, whispers, was only the surface. The real secret, the truth that mattered, had always been hidden in plain sight. But the letter didn't reveal the full truth. It didn't say who his biological father was. It didn't provide names, dates, or absolution. It only confirmed one undeniable fact. Harry was now standing at the threshold of a revelation that could shake the monarchy, redefine his identity, and force him to confront every assumption he had about his life. And that is where Chapter 1 ends, at the precipice. The rumor that refused to die had prepared him. The whispers had guided him. The photographs had pointed him forward. And the envelope? The envelope was the spark. What happened when he finally began to chase that spark? What truth lay waiting for him inside the shadows of the palace and the hidden corners of Diana's past? Diana's secret warnings. Stopping before reaching 2,000 words. From the very beginning, Diana knew. Not the tabloid rumors. Not the speculative gossip. Not the fleeting whispers of palace aides. She knew. And she carried that knowledge like a secret flame, hidden beneath the armor of public appearances, charitable smiles, and royal protocols. But what did she know exactly? For decades, the public only saw the surface. Diana, the Princess of Wales, beloved, elegant, tragic. A mother, a fashion icon, a global figure. Few understood the private battles she fought. The nights she cried alone in her bedroom, questioning who she could trust. The quiet moments she spent preparing her sons for a life that wasn't just extraordinary. It was dangerous in ways ordinary people could never comprehend. And one of those dangers? The truth about Harry's parentage. Diana didn't leave breadcrumbs for the public. She left them for her son. Consider the timing. When Harry was young, Diana spoke in riddles. Subtle warnings, gentle nudges, cryptic advice. "You're different, darling," she said one afternoon while brushing his hair. But that doesn't mean you're not loved. At the time, Harry thought she meant sensitivity, personality, or perhaps just the typical differences between him and William. He didn't understand. Not then. But Diana's words had layers. Layers of protection. Layers of foresight. Layers meant to arm her child for a truth no one else would tell him. Because in the royal household, questions were dangerous. Answers could be weaponized. Curiosity could be punished, subtly, quietly, emotionally. Diana's warnings weren't loud. They weren't direct. They were whispers embedded in bedtime routines, in private conversations, in fleeting expressions that seemed ordinary to an outsider. Yet to Harry, even as a child, they were everything. And some of those moments stayed with him longer than any photograph or newspaper clipping. Like the time she handed him a sealed envelope when he was only 10. "Not yet," she said softly. "Keep it safe. One day, you'll understand why it's important." Harry didn't understand. He didn't ask. He just kept it in a drawer, alongside old drawings, toys, and childhood memories. Little did he know, that envelope, like the one he would receive decades later, was part of Diana's careful preparation. A safety net for the day he might finally confront the whispers he had carried his entire life. Or maybe a warning. The more Harry grew, the more Diana's subtle messages took on new meaning. She would sometimes say things in passing. "People will say things to confuse you. Don't believe everything you hear. Trust yourself, not what others tell you about who you are." Sometimes the truth is hidden where you least expect it. These were not ordinary parental warnings. They were coded, layered, meant to be deciphered decades later, at the moment when Harry would finally be ready to face the full scope of the truth. Diana knew her son's world. She knew the palace. She knew Charles. She knew William. And she knew how the machinery of royalty could crush even a hint of rebellion, curiosity, or truth. So she prepared him quietly, secretly, carefully. And yet, she never fully revealed her hand. Not until the envelope arrived at 40. Not until he could no longer hide from the truth. Her warnings, cryptic and layered, were meant to guide him toward independence. To guide him toward clarity. To guide him toward self-realization. But there was also a darker layer. Because the warnings weren't just protective, they were defensive. Diana understood that the monarchy could never allow certain truths to surface. Certain truths that could shatter the carefully curated image of lineage, duty, and tradition. And Harry, unknowingly, was the fulcrum of that tension. She had witnessed it herself. The subtle glances, the hushed conversations, the tension in the rooms when Harry asked questions no child should have had to ask. Diana's protective instincts kicked in, and she used her intelligence, her foresight, and her maternal cunning to prepare her son for a confrontation with reality that no one else could anticipate. And it all led back to one principle. Trust your instincts. Follow the truth. Ignore what others say, even those you love. Because sometimes the people who claim to protect you are the ones hiding the most. Diana's secret warnings didn't come in isolation. They were part of a carefully orchestrated strategy, a web of subtle lessons embedded in everyday life. Consider how she interacted with Harry in public. To outsiders, it appeared ordinary. A mother guiding her child, showing affection, ensuring he was poised and composed for cameras. But to Harry, there were hidden messages. The way she lingered a second longer over his shoulder, checking his posture. The small pause before she answered a question he asked, a pause filled with meaning. The fleeting look in her eyes that said, "There's more here than anyone realizes." It wasn't just maternal instinct. It was foresight, preparation for a future Harry could not yet understand. And the palace staff? They never noticed. Or if they did, they didn't comprehend. Diana moved like a ghost within her own household. Silent, subtle, protective. Every action designed to shield her son from both the glare of the public and the secrets of the institution. There was the time, for instance, when Harry was around 7, and he asked an innocent question about family resemblance. Why do people say William looks like Dad, but I don't? A simple, childlike curiosity. Most parents might have answered casually. Diana? She froze. Not in fear, but in calculation. She looked at him with a softness and gravity that stayed with Harry for the rest of his life. "You will understand one day," she said. "And when you do, it will make sense." Sense. That word would echo in Harry's mind for decades. Because every memory, every comment, every photograph, every whispered conversation would eventually align with it. Diana also prepared him through subtle psychological lessons. For example, teaching him to trust his instincts, to question statements, even from those he loved, to notice inconsistencies, to observe, remember, and deduce. It was subtle intelligence training disguised as maternal guidance. Lessons embedded in the mundane, in childhood routines, in play, in affectionate corrections. And Diana's warnings weren't limited to verbal hints. Physical gestures carried meaning. The way she held his hand in certain situations. The way she placed him slightly apart during official photographs. The way she positioned him near objects or away from certain people. Each choice deliberate. Each action layered with unseen messages. And as Harry grew, these small lessons accumulated like a library of clues. A private archive no one else could access. Not the press. Not the palace. Not even William. Because Diana understood timing. She understood that some truths cannot be revealed too early. Some truths require preparation. Some truths demand maturity. And Harry's 40th year was that moment. The envelope, arriving from her trusted confidant, was the culmination of all her private work. All the hints, lessons, subtle nudges, and warnings converged in a single act, giving Harry the tools to face the truth about himself, about his past, and about the people around him. But Diana's warnings weren't only about self-discovery. They were also about survival. Harry was about to learn that the world could be merciless. That curiosity could be dangerous. That knowledge could come with a price. She knew he would need emotional armor, preparation, clarity of mind, the ability to discern who to trust.